Our brain is always trying to understand our senses, and today I want to talk about how it affects the way we hear and write music. When a sound is instant, our brain listens for a very specific set of traits to determine whether that sound is important enough to focus on. Those traits generally are loudness, frequency, intensity, and direction. We tend to notice very loud sounds before very quiet sounds, very high sounds before very low sounds, very intense sounds before very not so intense sounds, and off center before center. But what if someone is whispering in your ear and in the streets you can hear someone getting murdered? What do you focus on? One is very close by, of course, and directional, but very soft, while the other person, well, they're dead. What do you focus on? Now, these are all very in-the-moment sounds, and our brain handles them no problem. But what it's really good at is finding patterns across time. Now, let me give you an example. Let's take an average song, and let's say your melody tends to center around the same note. Our brain can notice that. If you're using the same intervals, the same steps in your melodies, your brain can figure that out too. Same goes for chords. Same goes for note lengths, note velocities. If your instruments shift, you name it. Anything that changes during the course of your song, you can feel that. Now let me go over some of those real quick and elaborate them. The notes you play take up a certain range during your song, and where you play within that range really matters. For example, inside the range can be very cozy and snuggly, while breaking out of it can add a lot of energy. A common tactic would be to start off your song with a tiny note range and then casually increasing it as the song goes on, and as you reach your chorus it expands, and then at the final climax you break out of your already massively enhanced note range. The same goes for your melodies. The movement between notes is a pattern. So let's say you descend all the time by taking steps. That's a pretty noticeable pattern. Let's say you do that during your verse. Now during your chorus you can introduce bigger steps or jumps, or not descend but ascend. Maybe you bounce on the note, the same note that you had before. That's pretty noticeable too. Now you have a one note range and a very busy rhythm. So breaking out of that one note range can add a lot of energy. But slowing down the rhythm can reduce your energy, so you get a little balance game going. Let's say now it's not your melody, but your chords that descend one chord, one step at a time. And let's say we have 4 chords. Now, chords are all about movement, they're all about energy, so every one of these 4 chords has its own distinct flavor of energy, its own distinct movement in relation to the other chords. Now, with these descending 4 chords, even just switching out the last chord for one that's descending 2 steps is going to change all the relation between the chords you already had. Maybe that one chord is subtle, but it can have a profound effect on the feeling of your song. This one I hear a lot with my students who primarily write in their DAW. They'll say something like, "My build-up isn't building up, it doesn't excite me," or "My song should feel alive, but it doesn't." And most of the time their mix is fine, their ideas are fine, but their notes are all the same. Now, just to be clear, I'm guilty of this as well. It's just so easy when you're starting out writing a song to make some 4-bar loop or some loop and paste it all over your session to get a general outline of your song, and then layer on top some more loops and fine-tune it a bit. And now you have a near complete song full of loops. Yes, on one hand, it really increases your workflow and the speed at which you can reach a deadline. God, do I know that. But it's also kind of the musical equivalent of someone with a really monotonous voice. It just kind of takes the life out of things. Just compare a bass line where all the notes are the same to one where every note is tweaked. Just a little bit of extra time spent on your tracks makes them come so much more alive. This one I think is a little more subtle and doesn't happen that often. Your instruments and sound design are all part of your song's DNA, as it were. And as your song progresses, you're going to add sound design, you're going to add instruments, layers on top of each other that kind of enhance the characteristic of your song. But your core instruments, they rarely change. So when you do change those out, when you change kind of the fabric of the DNA of the song, that can have a very profound impact on the sound of your song, which can be very strong, very powerful, but it can also make everything a little fragile. What we hear is analyzed so quickly and so deeply that usually we already know what's going on before we realize it. Mostly, we don't realize it at all. And that happens without any knowledge of music. It's just in our gut. Our intuition is so good at knowing what's going on in a song, how that made us feel, and when that happened. And it doesn't require any awareness on our part. It just makes us feel the song. And this is why it's so valuable to let your music be heard by people who have no idea how music works, because they won't get caught up in all the minutiae of the recording and the editing. They don't care about that. They don't know about that. All they care about is how your music makes them feel.